举因假设论 take a cause and make a hypothesis.
That's one of
Treatise on taking a cause and making a hypothesis.
That's one of 3 books attributed to Dignaga, only preserved in Chinese, and in that one there's supposedly a quote of the Mahayana Sangraha of Asaṅga.
What's that mean?
That means Jeffrey was asking if Dignaga or Dharmakirti ever quoted Asaṅga or Asaṅga, and I'm saying that this is one text in which he supposedly does.
Okay, so what would you like to probe?
I had a question about the change of language on 184. There's a section saying Paramartha Samagata speaks of the basis of imputation as before. The imputational factors are factors imputed in the manner of entities such as right meditative stabilization.
Well, if the text just reads Gunda, I might say imputational natures or imputational factors. It could be Gunda Pecha. No concerns. You suggest to me that, did the book get tangled up? Or is this combination of having the synopsis? Do you have another word for synopsis? Synopsis, you expect it to be brief, don't you? And this isn't. Of course, I do say detailed synopsis. It's like a, what do you call it? Oxymoron.
I found this book a lot clearer than any of the other stuff, actually. I think that it's really helpful to have, I guess, your wording of it with reference to the translation, so you can kind of go back and forth. And really, I felt like that way I was really able to get more down to actually understanding what the translation was saying.
Yeah. Good.
That and the outline. In each chapter synopsis, you list all the basic movements of the chapter, and that to me is really helpful.
Which is my listing of the movements is quite different from anybody's table of contents. You know, when they break it down, when any of the commentators break it down, they do it differently from what I do. What I'm doing, although mine might appear some here, there, and so forth, they do a very careful thing of breaking down every single part with subdivisions and so forth. I go into what I think the major movements are, because I don't think we need the other one. I've pretty much put the other type in the translation, although it's a little looser than Jime Tamjo Gyatso does. So let's turn to the next section and do a lead-in on it. How I got into writing, well, how can I call it a commentary and a synopsis? It is a commentary. I'll leave it at synopsis, who cares? I'd like to call it a commentary, but I want to keep it academically acceptable. And just the name might twist it. As if I had jumped whole hog into the tradition, which in so many ways I have, as it says at the beginning of the Reflections on Reality. So on page 51, what should I say? Let's say, it said, what do you mean? I just don't want to keep saying I. There are these 4 topics right in the middle of that paragraph, that Tsong-kha-pa has been context that he's used in the first section. He's presenting mind-only scholarship in a vivid way so that you can really know how to use the three natures. So that it isn't something like other-powered nature, perfected nature, as you know, some people, what do they say? Dependent nature. These terms are all right. Perfected nature, you know, as if these are abstract, whereas they're, you know, they're very particular. He's trying to present it in such a way that actually can be used. I don't think he was faced with the situation that we are, of people who just think of terms like conventional truths and ultimate truths, or, you know, conventional truth, ultimate truth. You know, it's just so vague that it doesn't, you know, you wonder what's being talked about. He wasn't faced with that. He wasn't trying to correct that. But he is trying to pursue the ins and outs so that, and from pursuing the ins and outs, being, you know, bouncing off the walls, so to speak, of the architecture, finding out where the walls are, really, it comes to life. Distinguishing the mind-only school from the consequent school, refining the Korean scholar Wonchuk's 7th century presentation, and criticizing the eclecticism of Chonangpa Sherab-gyalmtshan. So no longer does he mention Wonchuk. Wonchuk drops off. Now, Wonchuk's commentary is on the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought. The Sūtra Unravelling the Thought section has really ended. But then Wonchuk, in talking about the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought, draws in all sorts of Indian texts. So you can't really say that the reason why Wonchuk is dropped is that it's because he's no longer dealing with the sutra, but with Indian treatises. It's, I don't think you can give that as the reason. Well, I guess he felt he had done enough to refine Wonchuk's presentation. And how much he uses it and how much he doesn't use it is an interesting point. And I've gone through all three of these volumes. Just did it weekend before last, I guess, or just finished it on Tuesday. To find all of the places in these three books where Wonchuk is mentioned that aren't my own, that don't come just from me. There's only a couple actually just come from me. Tsong-kha-pa himself or Tibetan commentaries. And when you haul this out, that material, it comes in context, but as little context as possible. It makes 150 pages. Wonchuk meant a lot. I mean, he wasn't, unlike Sherab-gyalmtshan, who's being put down like period, Wonchuk is being used and then refined. And how much he's being used, you can tell even more by looking at the commentaries from Amdo, especially Guntang, Akulotra Gyatso, and Jime Tamsha Gyatso. Okay, now, Tsong-kha-pa, one way you could look at an underlying agenda could say that in order to show that Sherab-gyalmtshan is entirely wrong, he has to prove that the Sutra Unravelling the Thought is very important to the most important personages in the mind-only lineage. So he proves it with the most important person first, Asaṅga. He lays that foundation. And then he refers to, and then he does two of Asaṅga's texts and shows how, well, he gets into issues, but he's already set it up how much Asaṅga relied on the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought. In fact, in his Compendium of Ascertainments, Asaṅga quotes the entirety, not with ellipses, the whole sutra, except for the introduction, which is not very long. Why he didn't quote the introduction, I have no idea, but it doesn't get into beefy matters. The chapters 1 through 4 deal with the ultimate. And the introductory chapter is, at a certain place at a certain time in the presence of so-and-so great beings, blah, blah, blah. So, then an interesting point, he stresses, this is the fourth line of the new section, that Asaṅga's three works from the view of the chapter on suchness, the grounds of Bodhisattva, the Compendium of Ascertainments, and the Summary of Great Vehicle derive their central theme from the statement of Sūtra Unravelling the Thought, that other powered nature's emptiness of factors imputed in the manner of entities and attributes of the already established nature. Now, Schmidhausen, remember, the chapter on suchness and the grounds of bodhisattvas, I think he even posits that the grounds of bodhisattvas was written first, and the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought was written second. And he finds mind only. I wonder if I've got that straight or not. Check me up on that, would you? In any case, he finds mind only very clearly in the Summary of the Great Vehicle, but not in Grounds of Bodhisattvas, right? In the chapter on suchness, Grounds of Bodhisattvas, and probably by extension the Grounds of Bodhisattvas. Well, you'd have to do an awful lot of reading to find that out, which I haven't done. So there'd be a disagreement there. But the Compendium of Ascertainments, that quotes the sutra itself, the Summary of the Great Vehicle has quotations of the sutra also. My guess is that in the Grounds of Bodhisattvas, the sutra isn't quoted, but that's a very interesting point to look into. Okay, then he goes on to Maitreya's. So then, probably why he begins with Asaṅga is that Asaṅga is the human founder of the mind-only system, whereas Maitreya could be said to be the divine founder. So when you speak about openers of the chariot way, Shinda Sote, opener of the way of the chariot. So he does the human first, because that's when you're asked for the Shinda Soje, you give the human. Prabhupada. Then he does also, it's so much clearer. After all, he quotes the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought in its entirety, except for the introduction. Whereas Maitreya, it's a matter of the vocabulary. Okay? Noticing resonances in the vocabulary between the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought and his Dodegin and Uta Namche. Okay? These two texts on the bottom. Ornament for the Great Vehicle Sutras and differentiation in the middle and the extremes.
Maitreya's texts don't refer to the sutra, though, do they?
Do they quote the sutra?
No. There are resonances with the vocabulary of the sutra. And that's one of the points that Tsong was trying to bring out, along with using each of these texts to talk about certain issues. He isn't just saying, he isn't just making the point. These people use the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought. And so, once Asaṅga, Maitreya, Vasubandhu, Stiramati, Dignaga, Dhammakirti relied so heavily, at least that's the case he's making, on the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought. This then, in turn, backwards in a sense in his text, justifies Tsongkha-pa's sole discussion of the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought in the first section, rather than some other sutras. The tathāgatagarbha Sutra, or, you know. Now, whether he's justified or not in doing this is, you know, take a great deal of textual study.
Well, is the difference, or does what is not brought up by Tsong-kha-pa in doing that, in focusing on the Saṃdhinirmocana-sūtra and bringing that out of Asaṅga and Maitreya, is that difference in asserting that the thoroughly established nature is empty of both the other powered natures and the imputational natures by some, but whereas Tsong-kha-pa is presenting and interpreting the Saṃdhinirmocana.
Yes, you've gotten down to the point that I should have gotten to. That if the Saṃdhinirmocana-sūtra is so important, then how it delineates the thoroughly established nature is to be taken literally, and whatever you say about the thoroughly established nature should accord with the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought. Whereas people like Sherab-gyalmtshan are setting forth something that's supposed to be concordant with the mind-only school. It's an amalgam that doesn't agree with the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought. So first you set out what the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought says. Then you shows that the great Indian mind-only scholars relied heavily on the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought. And then you point out that Sherab-gyalmtshan's view on the thoroughly established nature doesn't accord with what the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought says. Now, in fact, now what's being pointed out, number one, is that other powered nature's emptiness of the imputation, non-existent, but the imputational nature is the thoroughly established nature, right? That's what the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought is saying. Whereas Chonamba Sherab-gyalmtshan is saying that thoroughly established nature's emptiness of the other powered nature and the imputational nature is the thoroughly established nature. And the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought is very clear on laying out that it's Tsongkha-pa's claim, but he's got even more evidence. There's more evidence that he didn't use than that he did use. Mm-hmm. That the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought says that Yongdrup is a mere absence, and not some positive entity. The one place where you might read it in to the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought, as I've seen it, is some of the examples used. He uses worldly examples. Then what's used for the thoroughly established nature is more substantive. So the case can be made more strongly than he made it, just by taking his lead and going into them. And that's why one of the reasons why his text has been so fascinating. to people. He wasn't seeking to do some hugely long work, but the result of his investigation. Thus, now an interesting point is that the sutra is even clearer. To my reading, the sutra is even clearer on the fact that the thoroughly established nature is just a mere absence than the Indian treatises by Asaṅga, Maitreya, Vasubandhu, Stiramati, Dignaga, and Dharmakirti. Even clearer. So, in one sense, it's this point that he's making is a return, certainly is using the sutra a lot. And I don't know if you'd say it was returning to the sutra, I was about to say that. But it is relying more heavily on the sutra, or at least as you play it out and see all of the references. Yes?
So there's a sense of three turnings which people think is sort of, well, three developments. But Dzogchen view is sort of they're not all, within each turning, there's not all one view, right? That there's sort of, even within one turning, there's all sorts of views. There's development of thought even within turnings. So would it then follow that even in what we call so-called third turning, there's development of thought beyond?
There's no development of Buddhist thought after his enlightenment.
Some people claim. It seems that there is, though.
Now, that's what we bring to it.
Yeah. Right.
I reckon that's what I brought to it.
Right.
Oh, for a while he taught this, and then I really kind of figured it out and taught that, and then he got deeper. So then you have to say he didn't achieve Buddhahood under the Bodhi tree.
We don't have to say that. I mean, you
Oh,
can
really?
just say that the way he said it. Well, no,
pretended.
you can go
Yeah,
back to tradition and say
No,
that
you could say that.
Right.
Within his skill and means, he
Right,
taught,
right.
you know, eternalism first, nihilism second, a mixture third, and then within the third he taught, you want to say, the Buddha nature.
But then you would argue that, you know, the skill and means got more and more subtle, more and more refined, or what?
You can't.
You can't say that. Why not?
Buddha's skill and means is always the
It's
same.
always the same, right?
He encountered disciples who were capable, who were more capable. Although, if you look at the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought, it looks as if those who were the trainees of the literal reading of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are really bad off. Because it said they fall to a view of nihilism. But you can elegantly explain your way out of that by saying that he taught them such what to sensible people would be seeming nihilism, because that was the only way those people could posit cause and effect. It's a brilliant, brilliantly elegant way around, in order to posit, why not be clear right in your words? Why not just talk about the three natures right out? So, the three wheels, when you look into it, very torturous issues in the three wheels. Number one, with one syllable of speech, the Buddha teaches what is people here, beings here, what is appropriate to them. So three wheels and all that doesn't play on that level, okay? And you've got to understand that. It doesn't play on that level. It plays on the more common level of, these are the words, and why did he say this, and what was he saying, and so forth. Otherwise, you couldn't. How could you have three trains of wheel? Anyway. But, you know, it's said that he taught the wheel doctrine of the Four Noble Truths first. I believe, forget, I don't know, there's all sorts of problems, like he taught some Perfection of Wisdom Sutra simultaneously at some other place. But that's out. I don't think that's drawn into it. Did Buddha teach the Four Noble Truths in the manner of the first wheel, which means that he taught that everything is established, is did he teach that only during a certain period in his lifetime and not during the other periods? He says yes.
I didn't see anything.
And therefore, do you want to say that he encountered no disciples later, you know,
I know, you can't.
once he began the second wheel on, he didn't encounter anybody who needed that teaching. So Johnny Shiva says that the period goes from the, you know, first teaching on Four Noble Truths to his death, up to his death.
But in the definition of the wheels, they say in such a place, you know, that, I don't remember the exact wording, but don't they include a location for each wheel?
There are locations, but that doesn't mean that they were the only ones. You see, you have to begin, you know, you make so many refinements, you know, maybe you say the actual first wheel is from the time that he taught the Sutra, what is it called? Anyway, the turning of the wheel of the Four Noble Truths, up until he began the teaching of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. You might call that the actual, and then have some other non-actual word for the other times he taught it during the rest of his life. Or you might say that it was just the first time that he taught these things, which in a way seems silly too. And do the three wheels refer to, you know, when the Saṃdhinirmocana says, this Sunset Sutras of the first wheel require interpretation. Does it mean that all sutras spoken during that period require interpretation? All words out of the mouth of the Buddha during that period require interpretation? No. It means, at least as far as the Saṃdhinirmocana-sūtra is concerned, it means those that teach that Chötamche-ni, right? Only those. And the middle wheel, Chötamche, Ramuni Matruba, those that teach that. And the third wheel, Leche Shunko, Leche means good differentiation. Churnam ki nangne, something like this. Shenwan don yondro ni rangi tseniki truba tang. Gunda tseniki ma truba. Right? So just what the Sūtra Unravelling of the Thought is talking about is just those doctrines in the third, during the third, you can say third period, that teach these particular things. Therefore, as far as the Saṃdhinirmocana-sūtra is concerned, other doctrines taught during that period, they're not saying are definitive, such as the teaching that there is a fully developed Buddha within each of us. It's not saying, by extension, that that also is definitive, is to be taken literally. Now, as a side note, it's interesting that the sutra that teaches that there's a fully developed Buddha within all of us and merely needs to be uncovered is found only as a quote within the Lankavatara Sutra. Otherwise, there are 10 sutras on the Buddha nature or tathāgatagarbha, Deshin Shepe Nyingbo. Those are not the ones. We're talking Gelugpa scholarship.
Right.
So it's very amusing within Gelugpa scholarship, these 10 sutras are said to be concordant with the middle wheel. They were taught during the period of the final wheel, but they're concordant with the middle wheel. Now these don't speak, as far as they're concerned, of a tathāgatagarbha, fully, which is a fully developed Buddha within each sentient being's continuum, which merely has to be manifested. They don't speak of that. They talk about a tathāgatagarbha, which is the emptiness of the mind, which makes enlightenment possible, and thus can be taken literally in accordance with the second wheel. But how do mind-only people take those sutras? I guess you have to say if it's the Madhyamaka type of emptiness, that then they would have to be they would have to require interpretation. It gets into messes, one mess after another. I mean, 3 wheels is no easy topic. It's the topic really that I started on with Gen Tenzin in Lhasa. I mean, I'd studied Lecture Nyingbo quite a bit, or you can hardly say that. You never finish it. And he jumped me into that topic because he wanted to play with me. And caused me to see the difficulties, which I soon did. Kept wanting him to say what his answers were, and he wouldn't. Purely Socratic. So, it's very important to understand that Tsong-kha was saying that it's just certain teachings within the third period. We can make 3 periods, no problem. But certain teaching. Now, yeah, that's enough. So, there's a list of the texts that Tsong-kha considers, and then chapter 6 and 7 deal with the extreme of deprecation, and thus they're pointing to arguments with proponents of the middle way school. And make it very clear that Asaṅga in these texts is opposing doctrines of the middle way school. Thus, makes it clear that mind-only school is to be differentiated from the middle way school. Thus, or thereby, making it clear that Chonam Bosherab Gyaltsen is in a mess, because he's doing an eclectic pull from everywhere. And whereas these authors don't find themselves to be concordant, they debate with each other on these very important issues, which, as I say, still doesn't mean that what Sherab Gyaltsen did was uninteresting, or maybe it doesn't prove it's, even if Tsong-kha's case really is proven, is correct, it doesn't mean that what Sherab-gyaltsen did, even if it doesn't accord with these great Indian scholars, is either wrong. It would be wrong if he claims. It would be wrong if he claims that it accords with Indian scholars, but it can be a new twist, an eclectic twist. So, in chapter 6, I mean, it's clear in all of these 6 through 9, it's clear that these authors are dealing with the point that the statements in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras that should not be taken literally. You've got to posit the thought behind them. Whatever that Rangitseniki Truba means, right? You know. Chapter 7 on the Compendium of Ascertainments gets particularly sticky when he looks into the vocabulary of the two truths and existing ultimately, existing conventionally, existing substantially, and existing imputedly, making the point that if you don't differentiate how the various systems use these, you won't understand why they argue among each other. That the Sutra school could say that the person is imputedly existent, and yet the Prasangikas argue with them. Why? Because they have a different meaning of imputedly existent. So if he's going to pull fast ones, if Tsong-kha is going to pull fast ones, it's going to be in chapter 7. Manipulate the terminology so that, he imposes different meaning on it, right? In order to make the division, create the division between mind only and Madhyamaka, right? Or, given that they do obviously argue against each other, to make clear that there's no mixture of mind only and Madhyamaka in the Indian source text, okay? Again, thereby undercutting Sherab-gyaltsen. I don't want to put Sherab-gyaltsen out to the very fore, but it has to be understood that that was the cultural context. And that's what he's often talking to, even if he doesn't say who he's talking about.
Tsong-kha-pa says that the Jonangpas are not even great vehicle Buddhists, right?
Well, he says that they're nowhere within the 4 schools of tenets.
But where would the Jonangpas have put themselves?
Must have been, I don't know, that's an interesting question. Certainly Madhyamaka, I would guess, or great Madhyamaka. That's a phrase used by some Sankhyas, anyway. And Jonangpa is it's not really an offshoot of Sankhya, but it's like that. You'd probably say great Madhyamaka. And I was hoping that when Jose Cavazon came here, he would give a talk on this Sankhya differentiation of Yogacara and Madhyamaka and great Madhyamaka, and the vocabulary gets used in different ways. But his heart was set on doing colophons, which was interesting. It's just we never got to this other topic. We should get somebody in who can. George is coming in the spring, isn't he?
It's coming in about 1 month.
1 month.
November 15th.
No, I should call him up and ask him to do this for us. Yeah, because he can do it. Be very helpful for all of us. I haven't done my Sankhya research yet, which has to be done before this is published. And nobody stepped forward yet to translate the whole of Nyetan Gyatso of Sharp-Gyatso. Well, I saw that it was rather easy reading, but so central, so important. People, a lot of people dumping from other sects, not just Gelug, to seeing him as extremist. So it'd be good to have his, his source quotes. Then, chapter 8, the Sūtra Unravelling the Thought says that all phenomena are natureless, ngoni-meva, without production, magyeva, without cessation, makakpa, quiescent from the start, sumane shiva, and naturally pass beyond sorrow, yongsu nyangan deva. So chirtamje ni, ngoni-meva, gyawa-meva, gakwa-meva, sumane shiva, yongsu nyangan deva o. Now this is you see, we've been talking about ngoni-meva, the teaching that all phenomena are ngoni-meva. But the perfection of Wisdom Sutras not only do ngoni-meva, magyeva, magakwa, sumane shiva, tongue, yongsu nyangan deva or nyangan deva. But anyway, let's do the longer version. So sumane shiva means quiescent from the start. So in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, Buddha taught that all phenomena are natureless. Yeah. Ngoni-meva, magyeva, magakpa, sumane shiva. Suma means like from the start, from the beginning, even though there is no beginning. Okay? Shiva. What do I give as quiescent from the start? Yongsu nyangan deva, thoroughly passed beyond sorrow. All of these phenomena are yongsu nyangan deva, is what he said. There's sumane shiva. So now you see, all of those make it sound as if, to the untutored ear, that all phenomena don't exist. They're quiescent from the start, etc. In Prasangika, what's being talked about is inherent existence. One has to understand that. It's not saying all phenomena are non-existent. But it has to be in the perspective of meditative equipoise, phenomena are not seen. All that's seen is emptiness. The phenomena that are the bases of emptiness aren't seen. So in one way, it's psychologically describing the state of meditative equipoise on emptiness, except for a Buddha. Okay? But more philosophically speaking, you have to understand that what it's talking about is an absence of inherent existence. But now in the mind-only school, they use tremendous artifice to go in on each, as we've seen with ngoni-meva, right? Positing ngoni-meva sum. Then they posit, I think it's 8 types of magyeva, and so forth. I'll just say and so forth to get myself out of the hole I was plummeting into. And the Indian delight, aesthetic delight in, let's find how many different ways could you say that magyeva, and yet not have it mean that these things, these dependent arisings, aren't produced, and that will fit in the system and will be, elegant, and that you could claim really smart people when you said, you know, I just bought a new car. If I said it's unproduced, you'd understand that its creative beauty was so great, it is as if it was naturally there, right? Whereas I do hold that it was produced most of the time. And then there's a that's the standard list of nga, 5. As well as that practitioners should gain forbearance with respect to the doctrine of magyeva, of non-production. I think this one is Magyeva, gaining facility, gaining forbearance, gaining non-fear with respect to the doctrine of non-production. Then, chapter 9, considers 2 stanzas from Maitreya's differentiation, middle and extremes, on the middle way and what constitutes it. Middle path. So these are not his commentaries on those texts. It's taking very specific sections where he wants to make certain points and focusing on them. So then, for next time, read what we just read and grounds of Bodhisattvas. 5 and 6, yes.
Synopsis.
Yeah. Doesn't sound like much, does it? But let's do it. That's, you know, one text.